Let's go over some specifics on how to use the clamp gauge system. The first thing we'll call out is there's a different chart for each board thickness to ensure the most proper positioning of clamp gauges along the board length. The A, B, and C size clamp gauges will handle from 3/4 inch up to 1 inch thick boards. However, the positioning of the clamp gauges will differ based on the board's thickness to achieve the most effective glue up possible. Therefore, we have different positioning charts for 3/4 inch, 7/8 inch, and 1 inch thick boards for you to follow. The first column on the chart corresponds to the length of the board that you will be clamping. The next three columns, A, B, and C, tell you the quantity of each size clamp gauge that you'll need for a given board length. For example, a 30-inch long board will use one A set, one B set, and one C set of clamp gauges. The final grouping of columns on the chart labeled A, B, C1, C2 correspond to the proper positioning of the various clamp gauges as measured from the end of the board to the center of the various clamp gauges. For example, with a 30-inch long board, it tells us to position the center of an A-size clamp gauge at 4 inches from the end of the board. Then we will position the center of a B-size clamp gauge and locate it at 13 inches from the end of the board. Finally, we would then position the center of a C-size clamp gauge and locate it at 24 inches from the end of the board. When using the chart, you simply locate the length of the board you are gluing up and then read across the row of the chart to identify the quantity and sizes of the clamp gauges you would use and where to position them for the most effective clamping possible. Previously, you had to use a chart to manually look up the quantity, type, and placement of clamp gauges when doing a panel glue up. Now, with the new clamp gauge calculator, things couldn't be easier. The calculator comes in several different software versions for your use. Whether you have a Windows or Mac computer, or an iPhone or Android smartphone, we've got you covered. We even have an HTML version that will work with any web browser on your computer, tablet, or smartphone. Just download and install the ClampGAUGE Calculator software version that you plan to use from our Lake Erie Toolworks website, the Apple App Store, or the Google Play Store. Now that you've launched the calculator, let me show you how it works. The screen is divided into a top input section where you select the type of clamp gauge kit that you'll be using. In this instance, we're going to go ahead and leave it at the Journeyman kit. Next, you'll select the measurement type, either inches or metric. We're going to go ahead and leave it at inches for now. Then you'll select the board thickness that you'll be gluing up. Let's leave it at 3/4 of an inch. Now you'll select the board length that you'll be gluing up. You can either key in the actual length of the board, or you can use the sliders on screen to go ahead and select the board length. Let's put it at 50. When all your glue up details have been selected, just press the Calculate button. The bottom output section then displays the type and quantity of clamp gauges that are required for the glue up, as well as where to position the clamp gauges from the top edge of the board. For the web browser and computer-based calculator versions, you can even press the print button to get the results printed out for you. The clamp gauge charts are nice, but using the clamp gauge software just can't be beat. The next clamp gauge system enhancement features our new EPDM Retention Bands, which have taken the place of our previous rubber bands to help with aligning clamp gauges during a glue up. The purpose for using a band is to help with the alignment of a clamp gauge during the glue up process. We initially thought of using a magnet to hold the clamp gauge to a clamp, but decided on using a band to avoid any potential health concerns for people with pacemakers, as magnets may interfere with their functionality. Sometimes the simplest options prove to be the best. The new EPDM Retention Bands offer many improvements over the previous rubber bands, including 100% non-latex, so no more concerns for those with a latex sensitivity, all weather and not affected by temperature changes, UV and ozone resistant, they don't trap moisture, they won't lose their elasticity, and most important, they're specifically designed for industrial use. Now, let's review the proper positioning of clamp gauges as they pertain to longer board glue-ups. Shorter length board glue-ups are pretty straightforward, as you typically would only use 1 or 2 clamp gauge sets to achieve a strong and long-lasting glue-up. It's when you glue up longer length panels that woodworkers should follow standard clamping best practice, such as positioning your clamps in an over and under staggered method along the board length, in concert with using the clamp gauge system. This will minimize any bowing of the panel as it's being clamped up and as the glue cures. We also recommend the use of clamping cawls across the width of the panel face being glued up. In addition, end clamps help to ensure a flat edge across both ends of your panel as well. These techniques aren't required for use of the clamp gauge system, but they are board clamping best practices that all woodworkers should follow. We also want to provide more detail on the type of clamps that are compatible with the clamp gauge system so that it functions properly. 3/4 inch pipe clamps are compatible for use with the clamp gauge system. They are stiff and therefore do work very well. I-beam style clamps are also compatible for use with the clamp gauge system. The bars are stiff and they flex very little under clamping load, especially when gluing up wide panels. Bessey K-Body Revo parallel jaw clamps are also compatible and work very well with the clamp gauge system. These clamps are very rigid and they produce enough force to flex the clamp gauge tool. Aluminum bar clamps and one-handed clamps are not compatible with the clamp gauge system. They work great for assembly type applications, but they simply don't develop enough force to flex the clamp gauge tool. Let's revisit the topic of recommended glue clamping pressures for different wood types and see how the clamp gauge system takes the guesswork out of glue-ups. The recommended clamping pressure in pounds per square inch from glue manufacturers to ensure the strongest and longest lasting glue joints possible are 100 to 150 psi for softwoods such as pine, 125 to 175 psi for medium woods such as cherry, and 175 to 250 psi for hardwoods such as oak and hard maple. The unique design of the clamp gauge device, coupled with the force exerted by an appropriate type clamp, allows us to consistently achieve the proper clamp pressure rating as recommended by glue manufacturers. Here's an example of the glue-up clamping pressure achieved for a typical hardwood, red oak, as tested with the Optima digital scale S-type load cell, which is capable of measuring up to 5,000 pounds of force. This measured force corresponds to 205 psi, which is within the hardwood recommended range of 175 to 250 psi. Here's another example of a glue-up clamping pressure achieved for a typical softwood, white pine, as tested with the same load cell setup. This measured force corresponds to 122 psi, which is also within the softwood recommended range of 100 to 150 psi. Different wood species have different recommended clamping pressures. Softer woods need less pressure than harder ones. Clamp gauges self-adjust by having the clamp pads press into the wood more on softer woods compared to harder ones, effectively making the gap smaller and requiring less force to bottom out. The pads are also sized compared to the rest of the design so that each type of wood achieves its correct recommended clamping pressure. Bottom line, clamp gauges take the guesswork out of glue-ups. We hope that you'll find the clamp gauge system is a very useful addition to your tool chest. And if you ever have any questions regarding this or any of our Lake Erie Toolworks products, please feel free to contact us.